Anne-Marie, you are a chartered fellow with the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, CIPR, the Center for Strategic Communications Excellence. You're the co-founder of True, which is a consultancy helping organizations unlock real potential using behavioral science, which I think that's a lot of strategic communications with AI out there. We're starting to use more and more behavioral science. Choice architecture, what is it? And how is it that each one of us intuitively or using our cognitive brain is actually using it already?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I need to preface this by saying I'm not a doctor or a scientist or a Nobel Prize winner.
Well, you're going to play one in the podcast.
I'm going to play one in the podcast. I am a practitioner. And the reason that my co-founder, Howard Craze, and I set up Through is because we have this whole concept of people-centered change. So the way that we had seen a lot of change go on in organizations is, I'm paraphrasing now, follow this process from one of the, different change models and change will happen. Or if you just make the poster a little bit bigger, then change will happen. And so one of the things that I've been quite interested in for the last few years is two things, like neuroscience and behavioral science. And choice architecture is something that comes from behavioral science, which is all about, if I'm kind of paraphrasing, kind of the systems we put in place to help people make decisions. I think that's kind of what it is in a nutshell.
Okay, and there's this mechanic called the default effect.
Yes.
When I went into my hotel room, my whole default effect got thrown off. The thermostat, the bathroom, the couches, that's kind of what is that?
So the default effect kind of works on the premise that we take the path of least resistance, and that we basically go to defaults, which is why if anyone else like me has been caught with their subscriptions because we don't cancel them, a lot of the subscription companies, the default is that you will kind of sign up again unless we hear otherwise.
Auto renewal.
Yeah. And actually, it's quite interesting because there are some ethical things around kind of that default concept. My background is financial services, and we weren't allowed to use some of that kind of default concept in some of the work that we do. But you can actually use it to your advantage, actually, in terms of the default.
Give me an example where the default effect is changed within a communication strategy and how that turned out.
Oh, I love this. And I had to kind of dig deep for a few examples, but this is another example of if you make a bigger poster, then change will happen. So I just want you to all think about printers that you have within your organizations, and they cost, I don't know whether this is visible to everyone, but all the paper, the printing costs a lot of money. And people were doing single-sided printing in color, and we didn't want that to happen. So the comms goes out, only print this if you really need to, and let's do double-sided and let's use black and white because it's, cheaper. And what happens? You can guess, nothing much happens around that. And so then the posters went up, do you really need to print this? And the posters went up slightly bigger, etc. And again, nothing really much happens. Not because people are bad people, but because they tend to do what they're used to. You kind of just press print, don't you? And the printing goes off. When we spoke to the IT teams and put the default as actually the default is on every printer, double-sided black and white printing, then guess what happens? Mm-hmm. People don't change it back to single-sided color, do they? So that's kind of a really kind of simple example of how you can use kind of defaults as opposed to a bigger poster.
Is it important to keep tabs on, this is part of the user experience, right? Customers keep tabs because it's not static. It's forever changing.
It does change. And even things like signing up for events, for example. So, as I said before, I'm not a behavioral science, but I do really like to understand how it works in terms of making user journeys easy for people. And I think what a lot of organizations do is they design experiences about what's most convenient for them and not necessarily thinking about the whole user experience. So if we think about signing up for an event, for example, I want that to be as quick and easy as it is. If I use Eventbrite, but others do exist, Eventbrite's got all my details. I click I want a ticket, and the ticket goes into my kind of Apple wallet. Whereas if some organizations have put friction in that because what they want is to collect data, they want different choices, and therefore I'm less likely to sign up because it's a bit of a faff and I'm busy and I've got lots of other things to do. So that's kind of, an example of where we need to make sure that we're designing with our audience in mind as opposed to with kind of the organization in the end.
For someone in the room who wants to be deliberate about implementing choice architecture or the concept of choice, what are the good initial steps or to recognize what I'm already doing and maybe didn't put a label to that?
Okay, so one of the frameworks I use, and there are multiple different frameworks that you use if you're kind of interested in behavioral science, but one of the ones that I tend to use in a lot of my work is the EAST framework, which EAST stands for easy, attractive, social, and timely. And again, it's a framework that works because it actually works on people, how actually people behave, as opposed to how we think they behave. So when I think about easy, for example, is are we making the process easy for people? So think about the staff survey that many of us will need to get people to fill in. If you've got capture codes and emails and passwords, and you're adding friction to the journey, so you're not necessarily making it easy for people to do that. So it's about looking at that. Attractive is, is this, how do we make this something that people actually want to do? Social, which is the one that I really love, which is maybe because I spend too much time on social media, but this is about we do things when other people do them too. So again, 90% has completed the survey. Do I want to be in that 10% that hasn't done the survey, for example? And then timely, making sure that we're putting in those cues and interventions at the right time when people are thinking about making those decisions.
This is a decision-making room. This is a room of people that can implement change at scale, right? Mm-hmm. What are the obligations, including the moral and ethical obligations that go with that? Because change architecture defaults can be used for good and they can be used for maybe not quite as good.
Yeah. So when I think about behavioral science and choice architecture and defaults, this isn't about coercion. This is not getting people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, because that's not really ethical. Let's not talk about
really. Oh, what if I'm getting them to eat more salad? What if I'm changing where the salad is available?
What you need to do is, what you're doing is helping people people need to still have autonomy, but you're kind of helping to influence choices that they want to make, if that makes sense. But we're just making it easier for people to make their own choices. I think that's a difference to having a default, which is it's taking that whole choice away. So if I look at things like salads, for example, I'm thinking about my gym. Is it easier to get the salad or is it easier for me to get the chocolate and sweet? So that's kind of all about kind of placement and framing and stuff like that.
Okay, I'm thinking about how you almost can't do an episode these days without talking about AI. Oh, no. AI is changing the way we interpret things. There was a comment earlier, about half hour earlier, about a very senior communications leader meeting at the C-suite table, and the leaders are saying, "Well, your strategy doesn't correlate with what I'm hearing from ChatGPT or from Claude." That's default architecture at the same point, because the LLMs are making things fairly easy for us, and they're sycophantic, and they tend to agree with what we already think.
AI. I mean, where am I going to go with this? I think that organizations and people are running headfirst into the Wild West because of this whole fear about missing out. And what I would encourage people to do is take a step backwards and think, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So for things like AI, I get when you think, what is it okay to take that away and AI can get on with that and crack on with that on its own. As we're speaking, I have AI agents doing things for me because I'm happy for it to crack on and do things. Mm-hmm. What are things that need AI and humans in the mix, and making sure that you're really quite deliberate about saying this needs humans and AI in the mix. And only the other day, I'm not going to name them, but there was a big full consultancy that have got into trouble again for giving to their clients AI-generated stuff without humans in the mix. And what are the things that only humans need to be in the mix for? And I would suggest things like advice and guidance and critical thinking and knowledge are things that you can't abdicate to an LLM or an agent. I think that you do need to have them, because if you don't, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? We're kind of opening ourselves up to things that we don't even know are going to happen yet, because AIs take their cues from lots of different places, and they can't think for themselves, even though we kind of pretended they could think. They don't really kind of think for themselves. So we do need to be really deliberate about what it is that we're using AI.
Okay, last question, a broad question, then we'll go to questions in the room. How important is it that post-secondary institutions offering communications and public relations courses are implementing behavioral science into the curriculum?
All right. Okay. So I sometimes feel a little bit sorry for teachers because we expect them to do absolutely everything for us. But I would say that you can't work in communications unless you understand how humans behave. It's not about a bigger poster. It's not about, if you take people through this change management process, then change will happen. It's about understanding how humans behave. So humans are not logical beings. I mean, we're partly logical, but we are emotional beings. And so we need to, if you want to be a great communicator, you need to understand how humans behave, operate, make choices, and not default to some of the lazy thinking, which is people don't like change. Of course they like change. I change my hair, you change your partners, you change your dinner, you change your outfits, yeah? But it's about how can we make it easier for people to change and to do the things that we want them to do, particularly in PR and communications where we have the power to influence. We need to be doing that for good. And we're all kind of IABC communicators in here that have signed up to, I've signed up to not only the IABC code, but the AI Global Alliance ethical code. And we just need to be making sure that it's not just a piece of paper that we put our signature to. It's something that we are incorporating into how we do our work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.